myself again.
Hi and welcome to NUFC Matters, and it is one of our NUFC Matters special. It is the final episode of our series Newcastle United, where we are looking at fans organisations through the last 30 years. And this show focuses on the Fans Liaison Committee, the Fans Forum, and the future. So cover quite a wide range of things. And we've got, as well as Steve Hasty, Neil Mitchell and Keith Patterson, who've been on each show. We're joined by Steve Wilkinson tonight, who was actually on the Fans Liaison Committee. We'll come to Steve in a minute. So what was the Fans Liaison Committee? Well, the Fans Liaison Committee was an idea that the club had to try and improve communications with Newcastle United supporters. Sound familiar? Yes, this has been going on for decades. And one man approached me directly. He was a Scouser by the name of Rogan Taylor. He'd been advised in the late 90s to contact me and ask me and other Fanzine editors for their advice on what was going wrong with Newcastle United's fan base and the relationship with Newcastle United. So I went and had a coffee with Rogan in Blake's in Newcastle City Centre. We sat, we had a chat. I found him to be an amicable fella, very intelligent. He's well educated and really liked the cut of his jib, to be perfectly honest. And what he said to me was he was going to speak to other people, and those people who he felt could help him, he would come back and re-communicate with them and come up with a game plan. After all, he'd been asked to do it by the football club. It was quite clear that this was a paid job, so he was going to do it the best of his ability and go back with his findings to Newcastle United. The one thing I did suggest to him at that time was that he should go out and do roadshows. He should go out and speak to supporters. He should go and gauge the opinion of the ordinary supporter in bars and clubs. And, maybe put it out there that he was going to hold some meetings. And that's what he did. And I know a lot of people went to these meetings. I'm sure that a couple of our panelists were there. Steve Hasty is not already. So maybe it's a good time to come to you first, Steve Hasty, and just say, what do you remember from those meetings, which I was at and you were at?
Yeah, what I remember is like an enthusiasm from Rogan to actually have something, to get something put in place. I remember a lot of people saying, "Are you getting paid? Are you getting paid?" Blah blah. And it was one of those hot topics because I think it had been in the Chronicle or something like that. But basically, I think from my perspective, I just saw this as a great opportunity to have your say, to somebody who you thought was going to take it back and do something with it. I was never a fan that sort of prior to 2008 had done anything. But I just remember being at that meeting and kind of feeling energized that there was something happening with fans and the likes of Steve and people like that that had tried over many years. There was now going to be an opportunity for them to be heard, or for us to be heard, whereas in the past the fans hadn't. That was just my abiding memory of those roadshows, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, they were interesting to say the least. There was a few raised eyebrows when I was there at some of the places, and to be perfectly honest, I felt Rogan was the right man for the job. Clearly somebody who, wasn't a Newcastle fan, but I didn't think that was important. I just think that he, as an outsider looking in, could grab, what was going on at the club, by the scruff of the neck, and maybe he's come up with some suggestions. And after those meetings, he went back and he formulated a plan to essentially set up what eventually became the Fans Liaison Committee. However, in his negotiations with the club, I think what the club were a little nervous about was the fact that they may end up sitting directly across the table from a group of people who didn't particularly like them, and that certainly concerned them. So in the negotiations, it was discussed about having a fans liaison officer, which is, to be honest, I think where a lot of my problems started with certain people within the fan base. And that will become more apparent as we go on. But anyway, the idea was presented by Rogan Taylor. It was called Freddie Shepherd. and the board liked what he'd done, liked what he'd suggested, and the plans were drawn up to have the Electoral Society to actually run an official election amongst supporters, essentially to put themselves forward to be on this particular committee. Now, the Fans Liaison Officer role hadn't been announced by the club at this time. They had decided to keep that from the supporters until they had decided who their Fans Liaison Officer was going to be. Now, unbeknown to me, Rogan Taylor, because I'd helped him so much, had actually already submitted a letter to the club to state that he felt that I would be the right person to be the Fans Liaison Officer in the event that the club chose to have a Fans Liaison Officer as part of this. Now, his reasoning behind that was that I'd done my time as a supporter. I was, obviously young enough, but I'd also helped him with the whole process. I'd been very helpful. I'd given him advice, and he felt that as well as the fact that I'd done that, I'd also quite articulate as a young man, and I could put my point across. And that if push came to shove and I had to go in front of the camera, that I wouldn't be nervous about doing so. So, in a nutshell, that was what he presented to the club. So, a call goes out for people to put themselves forward. And I guess that's the time to bring you, Steve Wilkinson, in, because you were somebody who, as I always say, puts his head above the parapet. Why did you do it?
Well, I think I'll just give you a background. I first put my head above the parapet in 1977, going back to the time when Malcolm Dix was trying to get on the board. The troubles with Newcastle really go back to the 60s and possibly even earlier. I don't know, but that time it was a closed shop. The board of directors, many of the same family. Lord Westwood was chair, and Malcolm Dix was trying to get on. He had the right, because he had 8 shares, to become a board director, but there was not a hope in hell of them voting Malcolm Dix on. So he tried to get publicity and stuff to do that. And then it was the time when the club was in turmoil on the pitch, with Gordon Lee leaving, Richard Dennis coming in and taking over, and the results, and there was a split in the club with the players as well. And after we'd lost against Bastia in 1977, Richard Dennis was sacked, and it was on that night when he was sacked, 9th of November that year. I went to the ground because they were going to have a board meeting. It used to be in the old gym, if anybody remembers, in the car park. The boardroom was upstairs of that. And I went to the door waiting for Russell Cushion, who was secretary at the time, to come out and make an announcement. There was a lot of press hanging around. I got talking to this guy. I think his name was Colin McGuinness, if I remember rightly. Definitely Colin. I'm not sure about his surname. And we just went when they sort of opened the door. We just went in with all the press inside the room, and Russell Cushion came out and read a statement to say Richard Dennis was relieved of his responsibilities as manager. And when it came out, Colin was going off to talk with Charles Harrison on Metro Radio. And as I was driving home, I had it on. And Colin was talking about he'd been involved with Malcolm Dix. And the plan was to form a group of supporters. And I said, I got in touch with Colin. I said, I'd be interested in getting involved. Long story short, that became the birth of the Newcastle Supporters Association. At that time, there were several people involved, but the key ones is how the club moved forward was people like Alan Rooney, John Woff, Malcolm Dix, Peter Radcliffe, who ultimately became the Magpie Group that got John Hall in sort of 10 years later. Key thing we managed to do was actually what is now known as the Irish Centre, and everybody's very popular. We said we wanted to create a club for a social club for the fans, and we took an old warehouse on the site of where the Irish Centre is now and built the Gallagher Club. And the biggest problem being that we could only get Vauxpear in, which didn't go down very well in Newcastle. But even though the pint that you got there was pretty good, we had a decent steward. And I was actually secretary of that club for the first few years. I started working away, so I didn't get involved in the NSA for the early 80s as it went on. And obviously the Magpie Group took over that. I next got involved in the 90s when combining with Stephen Miller and Rose Miller. Everybody knows Stephen Miller as the Paralympic athlete who's done very well over the years. And another guy called Terry Meadows. They had been thinking about starting a supporters group for disabled fans. And I got in touch with them, was interested in doing that because I was going to, in the early 90s when I was living away, I was going to a lot of away games and seeing the problems of grounds with disabled facilities. And you'd had the Hillsborough had happened, and the Taylor report had come out and was making lots of recommendations. So it was a good time to get involved in establishing a group of supporters. So in 1998, we the first game of that season, I think we played Charlton, and we put out a two-sided A4 document called the Toon Times, which is actually quite an established document still from the group now. Just inviting people to come to a meeting, and we got about 50 or 60 disabled people to come to a meeting that we actually held at Gateshead Stadium at that time, and I was elected chairman of that, and I served as chairman of NUFC for about 4 years, and we started to do events and got quite a good relationship with the club through Dave Patterson primarily, who was combining the needs of the Taylor report with the requirements of the Disability Discrimination Act that had come in 1995, as the ground was being developed to the situation it is now, which was about 2001-2. So we got a good relationship with the club at that time, and when the opportunity came up for the people to nominate for the Fans Liaison Committee, which was probably the early 2001, I think, Steve, wasn't it? Then I thought I'd put myself forward as the representation for being a disabled representative on the group, because there were lots of different categories that were trying to get a broad mix of fans, and I put myself forward as that. I think there was 3 other people in contention, and I got the most votes, and I think about the beginning of June that year, the names were announced, and that probably leads to you talking about who the other people were, Steve, on that group. So we're waiting for all things to happen and get together and meet. And we then learned that Steve was going to be the fans liaison officer, which I can't remember whether I'd met Steve before that or not. I certainly knew of you, Steve. And
there we go, Steve. There's a picture of you, and so you're down as the disabled representative. Then we've got ethnic minority. Was a guy called David Tour. Bringing children under 14 was our good friend Brian Williams. God bless him.
Away, didn't he?
No longer with us. Lots of love to his family. I used to travel to away games with Brian. Then we had the female representative, which was Marion Williams.
And we elected her chair, didn't we? Because she actually travelled up every week with her son from, I think it was Norwich. I think she travelled up from, if I remember rightly.
That's right.
She was a good leader because she wasn't your typical fan, that you would relate to, being a lady and traveling and seeing it from a good point of view. And she was a good leader, I think, and things would have worked out well with her in charge.
Yeah, the over 65 category was a guy called Mark Havery, and then travel to 8 or more away games was Michael Murray. I remember him going on a lot of away games with Michael over the years. He used to go on Spow's bus from Wardley. Then we had general representatives on the board, some rather well-known faces there. Jeff O'Brien, who eventually went on to become Lord Mayor of Newcastle.
Yes, right.
Then we had Simon Lindsay, Glenn Jackson. I remember Glenn was quite prolific in fan organisations over the years. Ian Gilmore, a bus driver now, but probably remember his dad better, Frank Gilmore, who was actually the independent Newcastle United Supporters Association chairman, running that from the Benton Ale House for many years. Ian Ferguson, who did write a column or two in the mag. I remember I used to travel from Scotland for the games. Was a nice guy. And rounding up, we had Peter Carpenter and a guy called Jim Beresford. So that was the Fans Liaison Committee. And the reason I was holding the programme up earlier is that's where I got that from. So I'm not sure whether you've got it, Steve. Newcastle versus Sunderland, Sunday the 26th of August, 2001. You actually made the programme. So that was interesting. But I mean, like, what did you have to do for the actual process of putting yourself forward? I mean, did you have to fill a form in? Did you have to put a statement down for?
Yeah, we all had to do statements, which I think they sent out a bulletin, or it was in the program again. There was you had to do a statement, and with the photograph that you've got there, and the election was all held really officially, and I think there was quite a few thousand votes. It wasn't, it was a decent thing, and the fans. You got to talk to people who had seen your name in the photograph, and they were interested in what was happening. So I think it did attract a lot of interest as to how it was going to develop, and we had strong hopes that things were going to work out.
Yeah, we did, and like basically, the spanner was thrown into the works when I was announced a little later as Fans Liaison Officer. Now, how I got that job was probably one of the most bizarre experiences of my life, because, as I mentioned previously, Rogan Taylor had put this letter into the club advising that they took on me as a Fans Liaison Officer to be the buffer, if you like, between the Fans Liaison Committee and the Board of Directors. So I got a phone call out of the blue from a guy called David Stonehouse. Now, David Stonehouse, for those who may recognise the name but not know exactly who he is, well, he had a degree of success down the road at Sunderland. He had essentially turned
financial director there, wasn't he? I think
turned there. Well, yeah, he was a financial director down there, but he'd been a bit like Freddie Fletcher down in Wearside. And he'd done great things down there, really turned things around. So David was headhunted, if you like, by Newcastle United and brought in as chief executive at Newcastle United. Now, I got a phone call off David to say, would I mind going up to the club for a coffee and have a chat with him? So, yeah, I said, no problem, I'll come up. Went up to see David, went up to level 5. He took us into the boardroom and we sat and chatted about football. I had a great time just talking about the team, talking about, potential new signings, talking about what, his visions for the club, what he wanted to do. And it was then that he said, you've helped Rogan Taylor with the Fans Liaison Committee. He's advised that we offer somebody the role of Fans Liaison Officer. Would you be interested? And I was like, wow, I'm getting offered a job at the club. And he goes, yeah. He says, I'm not sure how it's going to work yet, but you'll have been aware of the elections. We noticed you didn't put yourself forward for the elections, and Rogan Taylor feels you would be good as a Fans Liaison Officer. It's a role we've never had at the club before, but you would be the first. And I said, well, what would I need to do? At the time, I was working on the door. I was doing 5 nights a week in Newcastle. And he said, we don't actually know yet. It's a job we've never had before. Maybe you could go away, have some thought, and come back and give us some ideas of what you would want from this. I shook my head and walked away, and I came out in a bit of a daze. And I remember ringing my dad and saying, the club's kind of offered us a job, but I'm not 100% sure what they've offered us. So anyway, I went and met my dad. We had a sit down, we had a chat about it. And I was scratching my head a little bit. Other than knowing that I would have to meet the elected committee at each meeting that they came to, I wasn't sure what else I was supposed to be doing as Fans Liaison Officer. And the fact that the club didn't really know either really just made it a bit of a weird situation. Anyway, I gave it a couple of days. I emailed David back and said, look, I'd be delighted to take the role as Fans Liaison Officer. Who wouldn't accept a job from the football club that you love? Could I come back in next week and have a discussion about what you think and what I think after I've had a bit more time to think about it? So that's what I did. So I went back in a week later. We sat down, we chatted. We agreed in principle that it would be a minimum of 2 days a week. But if I found myself doing a project which I considered would take more time, then I had the option of increasing my hours at the club as I saw fit. And we agreed that the first couple of weeks that I would come in and have a bit of a getting to know you session with everybody behind the scenes at the club. And essentially, that's what I did. I would be working a 5-day week for the first couple of weeks and see how it went. When it came to the discussion on wages, again, I was like, well, what on earth do I ask? What do I ask? And I'd had this conversation with my dad. And I said to my dad, well, I don't want to be too greedy, but at the same time, I don't want to sell myself short. And I said, to be honest, if I get my season ticket money back, I'll be happy. My dad goes, you can't go in that short. So I agreed in principle on taking £100 a day. Bearing in mind, I was only going to be doing 2 days a week. So £200 a week, i.e., over a month is £800 a month, which, in 2001 was a decent wage for a young lad on Tyneside who essentially was going in to do a job which might have had a great workload, might not have had a great workload, but that is what I agreed on. So the club shook hands on that, and away we went. When I had to go back in to see Pam Nichol, who was head of HR, had to sign the contract, and I had to do a declaration. Anything that I felt was going to be basically, how can I put it, damaging to the club, anything that I wanted to put forward. And I've got to be careful with this because, as you'll find out later on, my fallout with the club was rather spectacular. However, the things that I declared, shall we say, prior to going into the football club were declared in writing and were there for all to see. So once that was all done and the paperwork was dotted, we then had a photo shoot, which eventually went out in the programme on the 1st of the 1st of November. Bradford City at home in the Worthington Cup. And there it is, my moment of glory. Steve Wraith in the programme, not quite a page 7 fella, but essentially there in a rather tasteful black and white jumper, I think, with the poppy on. Was November after all. And my explanation as to what my role was going to be at the club. David Stonehouse put out a press statement, which he asked me to contribute to. And it was quite interesting. I was checking back through the Independent, and it said Newcastle United yesterday took a further step towards improving relations with their supporters with the appointment of a fans liaison officer. Following a report drawn up by football academic Rogan Taylor, Steve Wraith, the former editor of the No. 9 Fanzine, is to work for 2 days a week as an independent link between the club and its supporters. His appointment is the latest move in a process aimed at restoring the bond damaged by a series of public relation disasters in recent years. My quote at the time was, I'm delighted to have been given this opportunity to work towards developing a better relationship between Newcastle United and its supporters, which is something I've been striving for many years, Wraith said. And David Stonehouse said, we hope supporters will agree that Steve will be more than acceptable as a line between the club and our fans. We have every confidence in Steve being able to put forward a balanced, unbiased opinion to both the club and the fans, and we look forward to working with him. And that was actually on the yellow ticker tape on Sky at the time. Newcastle United appoint fans liaison officer. So, but if it didn't feel real by then, it certainly did. Now, where did all the problems start? And this is what this show's been, covering a great deal. Well, let's just say it didn't go down too well in certain fanzines. And I'm somebody who keeps everything. Certainly, if it's reflecting on me. And this particular fanzine, although it starts off with a positive about the fans liaison officer job, basically it starts having a pop at, they started having a pop at me. And from my perspective, they didn't want me to have the job. They felt that the fans liaison officer position was a good one. But if you see at the bottom, it says, naturally, the fans liaison officer garbage is a joke. The club's poodle. As many suspected, the statement about improving club fan relationships may only form part of a PR spin to curry favour within the city, who must view the goings on at St James's Park with more than a little bemusement. Now that was in True Faith, and True Faith continued going on and on and on and on about my appointment as fans liaison officer. Steve Wraith, and this is the appointment, ex-editor of the No. 9 Fanzine, appointment as fans liaison officer, has raised a few eyebrows. To date, there isn't a fans liaison committee to liaise with. It might have been preferable had the liaison committee had a role in it, appointing the person to liaise between them and the club. Naturally, we wish Steve all the best, tongue in cheek, and if he can improve the atmosphere between the club and its stakeholders, great. As previously stated in True Faith, we have misgivings about the Supporters Liaison Committee because it will take a shareholder's trust is a different prospect altogether, and we hear things are moving along swimmingly on that score. We'll have news for you soon. Look, It wasn't my fault that the club appointed me, but already people were having a pop. And this is where my problem started as a Newcastle United supporter. I was offered an opportunity by the club, which other people felt they should have had. They didn't get it. I got it, and they didn't like it. And this is where all of my problems started as a supporter. So, you've got the gist of it. Steve's now on the committee. I'm now the fans liaison officer. What was your take, Steve Wilkinson, on the news that I'd been appointed? You didn't know me. You mentioned that earlier. But what was your news that a fans liaison officer who hadn't been elected had been appointed?
Well, I think the idea of how it was going to work was interesting, because it certainly needed somebody in the middle. I think had we got together and had you coming to meetings and being a stranger in the club, I think it would have been different. So I think it was, but I think it put you in a difficult position when we're starting to have meetings, because you were a fan, but you were also an employee, and I think it was difficult wearing those two hats. You're probably going to go into that more detail as your time experiment, but that was the initial thought. Well, at least it's a fan that's got the job, so that's good. I think I felt before we started, but I wasn't sure how it was going to work. Because we didn't really know. It was a bit like you said you had a brief of what, a brief that they didn't really know how it was going to work, and I think the Fans Liaison Committee had the same, other than it being a voice because it had been elected. It was meant to represent the fans because the fans had voted it, and so I think we probably thought we had a chance of talking to the club, and maybe weren't sure how it was going to work.
I remember a lot of negativity from certain people. You weren't one of them, but there was certain people on there. Brian Williams was an ally for me. We knew each other from the game, and he seemed to get on. David Tour, nice guy. I didn't know how to take Marion, and I don't think she knew how to take me. I got on very well with Michael, so I had no issues there. Ian Ferguson, we built up a decent relationship. I knew Ian Gilmore because of the Independent Newcastle United Supporters Association. Jeff spoke his mind, typical politician, wasn't 100% convinced about me, but we ended up becoming good friends. And then the other guys didn't have too much to do with them, saw them at games, etc. Didn't have too much to do with them. But there was one or two negative people about me. And again, it was probably swayed a little bit by the other people's opinions within the fanzines. Mitch, what do you remember about this whole scenario?
What people mightn't realise is at that time I was writing for that particular fanzine myself. And a lot of the guys who I was going to away games with at the time, my feeling was that, and as Mr. Hasty will back up, the history repeats itself all over again. That when they think somebody else has something that they should be doing, or is doing something that they think they should be doing, they inevitably turn on them. They turned on me, and frankly, it's water off a duck's back as far as I'm concerned. But obviously, I didn't know you as well then, but I always had an open mind to it. And had I not been so committed career-wise at the time, that I would have been put myself forward for this kind of thing, no doubt about it. And really, if you think about it, what almost a golden opportunity to be offered a job by the club that they don't really know what you want you to do. So it's like, right, we want you to work for you. You write your job description and you tell us how much you want to be paid for it. It sounds on paper fantastic, but it, as ever with a lot of these things at Newcastle United, when it comes to trying to work with a fan base to get a fan base united, it's a poison chalice. It's an absolute poison chalice. It's not so much herding cats then, it becomes herding hungry tigers, and you don't know which one's going to bite your hand off. And it's very, very difficult because we keep talking about what failures we have in terms of communication with the club. And it's not just communication with the club, it's communication within the fan base. And the repeated word is trust. nobody trusts anybody else to do the job other than the way that they want it done. And that very, very quickly say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be doing this. Oh, but you shouldn't be doing that, you should be doing this. And it's really very, very difficult to bring everybody together where that absolute air of total mistrust just hangs over constantly, not just from the club to the fan base, but within the fan base too. And that seems to be the perpetual frustration of trying to improve communication with the club.
Yeah,
I think
Keith,
can I just come
go
in
on,
and say,
Steve.
I think the possible sequence was wrong. I think if they'd had the Fans Liaison Committee more established before announcing you, because it was that lull of you had this job without a brief, and nobody knew where it was going to go. They knew the committee was coming along, but they didn't know anything more about it. And if they'd been nearer the time and had a chance to give a more defined role and announce the role so that everybody fully understood what was happening, it might have been more accepted. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, typical Newcastle. When did they do anything right? Keith, your views just on this?
At the time, I was an avid reader of the Mag and the True Faith as well. So I didn't know you. I didn't know you from Adam. I knew you'd had a fanzine. And when I used to get the fanzines, I used to get them at the airport when I was going away and things like that. I hadn't seen yours as much as theirs. So the marketing dominated by the Mag and the True Faith. So I obviously read all the stuff, the negative stuff really, about you. And I went up to the club. I mean, what year would that be, Steve, when you went up there?
It was 2000 when the concept was brought in, but 2001 when the Fans Liaison Committee was set up. It was season 2000, 2001.
Because I came up with on one of those meetings where, and the night I came up was the night we signed Carl Court, and Stonehouse was there, and I came up with Mickey Edmondson and I think Michael Martin and Mark
I was there
Jensen.
that night.
Aye.
I was there.
So I was invited up to the club, and Mickey Edmondson, Mark Jensen, Michael Martin, and me, and we were in there. I remember sitting in one of those boardrooms, and Stonehouse come in and he said, "Oh, look, you've got to be," and they made us wait for a meeting, and they said, "We're making a big signing." And they were all laughed because they said, I said, "Who is it?" And they said, "Oh, it's a striker." And we're all like buzzing, thinking who it could be. You obviously put the names out. And when they said it was Carl Court, I made a comment and said, "God, I was wanting someone that me Nana would know." You know what I mean? Not Carl Court, because he was like pretty unheard of and not a great signing. And 1 minute we were up there thinking it was like 20 million superstar. Next minute it was 7 million. It was Carl Court, and he was like, had no great reputation, what didn't turn out to be a good player. So we went up there that time and took in the boardroom where you lot were. And again, the perception amongst fans would be what we read in fanzines. That sort of, they didn't talk you up. And when they say tongue in cheek, they wish you best, off piece, they would be saying like, how's he got the job? So I didn't know you at all, didn't know what you're about, didn't know where you come from. I just heard, you used to do a number 9 fanzine. As far as needing it goes, I remember clearly that the club needed to build some bridges. They needed to create this role. And it just seemed for fans that Newcastle's communications back then wasn't great, and it was in great need. So I wouldn't have a clue who you were, whether you're the right one, but certainly the feeling that we read was you should have had the job. You know what I mean?
I mean, behind the scenes, things weren't going according to plan either, right from the start. I've got to be honest, because from my perspective, I took the job. I was greeted with a hail of criticism from my peers. I then walk in on my very first day at Newcastle United to be, as Oz would say in our Feeder's Ian Pet, about as welcome as a fart in an astronaut suit. Because as I got there, I had to report to Pam Nicol, the head of HR. That was fine. I then went to see David Stonehouse, who welcomed us to the club. We had a chat. Yeah. He then took us to see the new head of marketing at the time, a lovely woman called Carol Beverley, who she had big plans. She'd really just been appointed by the club, and she was taking over the marketing side of things. And from my perspective, I thought, well, this is great. I had to go and get my photograph taken by the head of security at the time. I had to get my laminate badge sorted out. But then I was expected to be taken up to the media department, where I was going to have a desk, a chair, and a computer. Pretty basic when you start a job at a football club. However, this is where my problem started, because I was greeted by the head of PR and media at the time, who was a woman called Hazel Greener. And Hazel definitely didn't want me there. She wasn't happy whatsoever that I was there, because she had a fan now walking around her media department. I was also starting with a guy who is still currently at the club, a guy called Mark Hannon, who went in as her number 2, her assistant. He recently transferred over from the Basketball Association, where he was chief head of media department over there. And me and Mark had actually gone to matches together. In fact, I remember the infamous 4-3 against Liverpool. Mark couldn't get a ticket, and I actually got him one. Unfortunately for Mark, it was in the home stand, and we had to run across Stanley Park together when Collymore got the winner, with people threatening to chop our throat during that game, because we couldn't help celebrating when Newcastle scored. Anyway, I diversified from that and moved back to their story. So anyway, I'm literally stuck on the media department level, talking to Hazel, and she basically says, well, I haven't got a chair for you, I haven't got a desk for you, I haven't got a computer for you. So I literally had to go and sit on another woman's desk, Judy, bless her, who was starting off the new fans response side of things. So she was basically dealing with complaint letters, and she said, well, I'm not sure why you sit next to me. She says, but I guess I could get the complaint letters out, and you can maybe look through them today. So she plonks 2 big files next to us, and I just started going through people's complaints, thinking they're going to sort as a desk or chair or phone or whatever out at some point. 2 weeks later, I got me chair, I got me desk, and I got me computer. 2 weeks. So literally, I was in that football club, reading through emails, reading through letters, on a couple of occasions meeting supporters who came to the club who weren't happy about locations of seats or about tickets going missing or whatever, dealing with all of the run-of-the-mill stuff that you would expect somebody to deal with in that position. But other than that, I couldn't do a great deal more. And within, it was 2 weeks later that I actually had my own desk. It was outside Hazel's office, so she could keep an eye on us. So I was sitting there. There was Ian Horrocks, there was Paul Tully, there was me, there was Mark Hannon, and there was Vicky, who was also working alongside the media department. We had a cracking little squad. We got on really well. And I don't want to dwell too much on my time up there, other than to say I did my best. And what I did manage to do was create a database of supporters, the fan clubs over all across the world. The supporters clubs in China, in Australia, in New Zealand, in America, you name it, there's fans all over the world. And these little groups had been set up. And got to remember, this is really before social media started. We had Fans Reunited in MySpace, but we didn't have anything like we've got now. So I was making phone calls. I was emailing people. I was checking out these blogs that had started to appear online, and I was contacting these people, and I started pulling in the database and feeding it back to the club. And I said, this could be massively beneficial to the football club, because you could do deals for overseas supporters when they return. I says, Ireland, is literally, a hotbed of Northeast football fans, and you could do deals on tops, on tickets, on whatever, and some people at the club understood and got where I was coming from, but other people just didn't see the point, and I always felt like I was, basically fighting like a losing battle. To be honest, the time I had there was great. On my lunch hour, I would go and sit in the stand, have me sandwich and look out onto the pitch, see the green, the green grass being cut by the groundsman. And I just felt lucky every day that I was there. I would sometimes bump into Sir Bobby Robson in the corridors, and he'd want to stand and talk about football and have a chat. And, I'd bump into one of the two of the players every now and then. But there was always a doubt, always a skepticism from those who I was working in and around. And gradually, the stuff in the fanzines became more and more prevalent, and articles kept appearing in True Faith, Power to the People. I mean, that particular article is just, I'll read the byline. Being a regular True Faith reader, I've picked up from several articles and editorials that the category of contributors that you do not have an awful lot of time for the whole concept of a Fans Liaison Committee or the Fans Liaison Officer. And it just goes on to rip me apart and rip the group apart and more or less say that it's just a waste of time. And, written by somebody called Tommy the Axe. I doubt it was a guy called Tommy the Axe. I can imagine exactly reading that, who wrote that article. And from my perspective, it was just character assassination. It was, the odd mention of the Cray twins, readers' letters coming in from John from Benwell, saying it's a disgrace having Steve Wraith at the club because of his association with the Cray twins. So we didn't have social media, but we had fanzines which were attacking me on a regular basis and making my job impossible. NUFC.com had started up as well, and there was always some tongue-in-cheek comment about the lack of activity from the Fans Liaison Officer or the committee, and I just felt disappointed. I just felt I hadn't been given a cat and hell's chance to do the job, and I was starting to become more and more disillusioned with it. In those early days when I was going in and doing a few days a week and making inroads into stuff, I just felt that this job is getting more and more impossible. It was an impossible position to be in, an impossible job. The meetings themselves, I felt at the first were beneficial. I felt that the committee were picked, were buoyed by it and they were enjoying the meetings. But it became more apparent, especially when I built up a friendship with the likes of Brian Williams, that they just were all disillusioned with it. It wasn't what they said it was. They were hoping to have more power. They were hoping to have more say. And they felt that it was a talking shop. And they had started to read the articles and felt, that this was it. And I guess I couldn't load this one because it's too big. But I think this one, Happy Birthday, Fans Liaison Committee, which was written by Ian Ferguson, who was on the Fans Liaison Committee and submitted to the mag, was actually... it was almost like the final straw. It was a year on, and he more or less condemned the Fans Liaison Committee in the biggest selling fanzine in the fan base, in the mag. And
how do you think the fact that David Stonehouse had gone not long after the group was picked up made a difference? Because I remember Russell Cushion didn't seem interested in it. He took over from Stonehouse.
I would agree with you there. And Russell Cushion basically invited me up when he took over from David. David left under a cloud and left a big cloud hanging over the club when he left. And we never got to the bottom of it. I have an idea why he left, but it's something I wouldn't say because I wouldn't want legal action. However, the situation then presented itself that Russell Cushion was put in his position. And Russell called me into his office, literally said, "Do you want a cup of tea?" I was made a cup of tea by somebody who's a well-known official at the club now these days. And then I ended up in a position where Russell came in and said, "Well, Steve, as you know, I've taken over from David Stonehouse. All I'm going to say to you is you watch your back and I'll watch mine." And that was it. So I then knew it was literally the beginning and the end of my job at the club, and that the Fans Liaison Committee would probably go the same way.
Actually, I thought the committee was dead then because you just got the sense that Russell Cushion wasn't interested in it.
I can't say too much about why I eventually left the club, but what I can say is that I ended up having to take the club to a tribunal, something which I didn't want to do, but I had to take the club to a tribunal for unfair dismissal, and I won my case. And that is all I'm allowed to say, because obviously I had to sign a disclaimer, if I wanted to take them to court, I had to say that, if they lost the case and they had to pay me out, then that would be the case. And I won my case against the football club. Not something I really wanted to have to do, but I was an employee. I had rights. I got onto my union, and my union, basically said, well, this is what happened. And a lot of that ties in with what I'd said when I first started at the club. I'm an honest person, as you guys know, and I don't hide anything from anybody, and especially when work's concerned. And I laid it on the line with the club. The club had clearly forgotten what I'd said at my opening interview, and when I referred back to my notes and gave that to the GMB who I was with at the time, they laid that out to the judge, and the rest is history. So yeah, I left the club under a cloud. The new dawn for supporters was no more. And I guess everybody at True Faith was delighted because they got what they wanted. They didn't want me in a position at the club, and they could all concentrate on being, pushing towards this supporters trust. And people might think that's the reason I'm bitter towards the trust. It's not at all. We've covered that in previous shows, but that is the full story of the Fans Liaison Officer's job and the Fans Liaison Committee. Steve, I mean, how did you feel, and what was the final straw, and when did you disband?
Well, I can't quite remember, but it was, we weren't getting anywhere really. You were, I think, you know, there was lots of good ideas coming forward, but there just wasn't the interface with the club that I think we expected. And you know, I think we were conscious that it hadn't been totally received well amongst the fans. So I think it was looking at though it was going to go nowhere, and it was just a talking shop. You know, we got together sometimes before the match. We didn't meet many times. The brief was only to meet 4 times a year, so I don't think we had that many meetings. You know, and the early ones were really getting ourselves organised. You know, electing Marion as chair and other roles. Although we did have, you know, some discussions of the thing, and I think organising the mandate and what we were allowed to talk about and what we weren't, because you know, as usual, you would always want to be, as a group of fans, interested in the whole thing of the club, and it was really defining the remit. Oh yeah, you can talk about how the ticket offices run, and you can talk about that sort of thing, but you can't talk about team selection and all the sort of stuff that fans were interested in some ways. But you know, I think we knew we couldn't do that. But I think we wanted more communication with the club, which was, you know, what really why the whole thing was put together, and it's still the issue. The communication has always been the problem.
Yeah, certainly has. I did, however, get something which I'm proud of. Headed paper. I did get a good reference off the club, so at least I've got that, and I still have a contract upstairs with Newcastle United, and that's not bad for somebody who's got 2 left feet. So at least I can say, I signed a contract with Newcastle. Not many people can say that. Okay. That's enough on the Fans Liaison Committee, but I'm pleased we did that, and you know, it's not easy to go back through that for me. I've got to be perfectly honest on a personal level, because something I felt I could have done a good job at, and I know now if I was in that position, I would be a lot more prepared. I was only a young lad back in those days, so you know, young lad thrust into a job which the club hadn't got a clue what they wanted us to do. So a little bit strange, but bit of history nonetheless. Okay, let's talk Fans Forum. And I'll come to you, Steve Hasty, first on this. Fans Forum. Tell us a little bit about the Fans Forum and what it was about. Because in the last episode, we touched on NUFC Fans United, the strive for more communication. You know, 20 odd years on, we're still doing the same. But, you know, tell us about the Fans Forum and how that came about. I know you and Steve Wilkinson were both part of that in the early days.
That's right. I mean, I think I had a bit of an advantage to what had happened on the Fans Liaison group. Because by then I was able to learn from what had happened with you, Steve, and hear from Steve Wilkinson exactly what the problems were, or what where they felt it was going wrong or went wrong. So we were able to learn from that. We actually had a phone call, or an email, which resulted in a meeting with Wendy Taylor, who was the press officer. And we met with her in the Strawberry. I think Zara was there, myself, a few others, and the one thing that came out of that meeting was that she felt that there was she had been specifically told to try and get some fans together who could galvanize other fans to help start a fans liaison group again, or as they were wanting to call it, the Fans Forum. Wendy was there, Simon Esland, if I remember rightly, who was playing the role of a supporters liaison officer at the time. I don't think he had 2 hats like Lee Marshall ended up with, but they wanted to start this communication. This was coming from her and from Simon, and she was hearing it from the top. Let's start this liaison with fans. Let's see what we can get. Obviously, we'd had the 2009 situation, 2008 with Keegan, 2009. We were moving into 2011. We'd already had that little bit of to and froing that we heard about on one of the previous shows with Neil and myself and our ability to talk to Derek Lambias, etc. But there was a desire to get groups together, but it was how it was going to, how it could mature. And I think one of our big fears was that we would just end up in the same situation as you guys were. And I think one of the big things that we noticed at the time was you never got any early wins. There was nothing that you could hang your hat on and say, you've done this, you've done that. We brought that to the club agreed to it, etc., etc. So anyway, it was ostensibly myself, a few others. We wanted to have this. We saw communication as being important, and sat with the club, talked it through with Wendy. Said, would we be willing to be part of it? Would we like to be part of this group? Could we encourage others? How do you think it would work? How could we get onto it? And that's when the format was kind of put into place, whereby you would have a representative from the over 65s, you'd have a representative from the Gallagher end, the East Stand, the Milburn, and the Leazes end. You'd have someone from the corporate who could represent the corporate area, so someone who was part of a corporate team or a company that had a box, and they were trying to get all sorts of different. A different feel from all different aspects. You had fans that only travelled to away games. You had fans that were not season ticket holders but were members. You also had fans who were representing fans who travelled to the ground from more than 150 mile away. All sorts of different people were areas were wanting to be covered. So it was decided that the best thing to do would be for the club to go out, put a note out to season ticket holders and to supporters in general, and say, would you like to put yourself forward? We will then either do a ballot or we'll do a draw or whatever. And it wasn't for us as supporters to decide who was going to sit in the committee. The club took that role and responsibility on. People had to write their own pen picture and say what they felt as though they could bring to the role, and then the club selected all the various participants, and off we went. We were invited up for the very first fans forum meeting, and what we said was vitally important was that this meeting wasn't just talking to the fans among themselves, and it wasn't just talking to Simon Esland as the fans liaison officer, and it wasn't just talking to Wendy from the press. There needed to be proper bodies with responsibilities, names. So we needed Derek Lambias there. We needed John Irvin there. John Irvin was the finance director, so we want to ask questions about finance. We needed people from the club decided they needed people there from the ticketing office. They decided the guys who were responsible for the maintenance of the ground and etc. They would be there, and so you could ask a question, and there would be somebody there who had the responsibility either to go away and get the answer or to give you the answer on the day. That was the way that they wanted to operate. But they also wanted to formalise it. They wanted to have an agenda. So we had key points that would be brought up. There was always going to be in any other business part anyway. But there was also a code of conduct that you had to sign up to. And the code of conduct was just that you were respectful to the people around the room, but also you're respectful to the process, and you're respectful to the fact that the club were obviously wanted to have an element of control in terms of what was going to go out after the meeting. So there would be minutes taken, minutes agreed, and then the minutes would be distributed. And it would be try and get as quick as turnover as you possibly could. Obviously, some people weren't on email, it might have been difficult or whatever, but the vast majority of people were. So we had our very first meeting. It was a very interesting meeting. It was quite fraught at times because there was definitely the way that the room was set up. I remember it was very much everybody in a line, then everybody in another line and facing each other. It was like, this wasn't the Knights of the Round Table this by any stretch of the imagination. This was very much a sort of, like a war cabinet meeting with the sort of allies on one side and the enemy facing them, and you were trying to come up with some sort of peace plan between us. It was almost like that situation that you have with North Korea and South Korea, and you're expecting the security guards on either side to be standing there and stepping in the way, and you had a no man's land in front of you. So the atmosphere wasn't conducive, if you like, that very first time. But we held the meeting. And I think, history, everybody knows what happened. The Supporters Trust published a set of minutes of their sort of opinion on how all of the points had been discussed, what had been discussed, and what the outcomes were. But unfortunately, that happened before those who were in attendance at the meeting had agreed to the minutes being seen, and the club, because it was the club that was supposed to be writing the minutes. So one meeting in and all hell was let loose. It was just mayhem. For the next couple of weeks, there was just absolute, all the trust had gone, if you like, straight away between the people in the room on one side and the people in the room on the other, because there had been a breach, which, whether or not you could, looking back, you could say, you know what, there was an overreaction. I'm not too sure. But if I went back to the email trail and showed you, you'd be amazed at some of the personalities that were in the room, some of the opinions on what had happened and how it had occurred, and more importantly, what should be done about the people or the person or the group who had put the minutes out. And I think virtually to a man, people felt aggrieved. They felt annoyed. They felt let down. And they felt as though it was a breach of all of the sort of way that we were expected to react or expected to act in that environment. The club, we then held, there was a series of messages flying back and forward. There was another meeting held. And at the next meeting, I think the trust were asked to stand down, not attend. And basically, to a man, a vote was held by all those who could attend the meeting. And they were asked, did they think that the trust should be allowed to attend in future, bearing in mind what they'd done? And it was almost a unanimous no. They shouldn't be in the room. They've breached our confidences. They've breached my confidence, your confidence, etc., etc. And as I say, if I mention some of the names, which I'm not going to do, but anyone can look back at those minutes. They can see the individuals who were vehemently against the trust being part of that setup. Now, what transpired, obviously, was that we carried on with the fans forum, but immediately, very similar to you, Steve, we then had the situation of fanzines attacking the process, attacking the individuals, attacking the process, attacking the whole system, attacking the way that the people were selected. They thought there should have been an election among fans. That worked last time, didn't it? They were against it then, but they wanted it now, etc., etc. They were against the individuals. They were against the fact that they were vehemently annoyed that the trust had just been struck off and told that they couldn't attend anymore because they weren't acting in the right faith, if you like, of how it was created. And it just became, from that moment on, it became an absolute maelstrom of a mess. The meetings themselves were great. Everything that was said to the club, everything that was put forward, the discussions, that was great. But what would happen was you were always having that chip away behind the scenes, undermining either individuals or collectively the group. No matter what you did, no matter what you came up with, you were always in the wrong. It was a no-win situation. But you know what? You just kept at it and thought, don't let the bastards grind you down. Not going to put up with this. We haven't done anything wrong. We're in the right. We wanted to have communication. The vast majority of fans still wanted the club to communicate with supporters, and I think there was a realignment, if you like, among certain aspects of fans. There was an understanding from the club that those who were attending those meetings and as volunteers and representing and coming up with some very, very salient points that the club could take away, that were all designed to help the club move forward, to help the fan experience, or whatever you want to call it, and to make the club understand more about what fans wanted. And they appreciated that we were getting it in the neck just for being in that room. We were targets. You were walking around at the match with a target on your back, quite frankly. I've continued to walk around that ground with a target on my back since probably that point, and I can bring up instances back as far, as close as 2018, when I was still getting grief, still having people who would give me grief because of my position on the fans forum. The club, I could say the club didn't help, but I could say the club helped immensely. Did it help the Fans United group because they were given a permanent place on the forum? In the eyes of certain fanzines, no. In the hands of certain individuals, no, because they felt as though we weren't a democratically elected group. But that's because the only democratic elected group that we had soiled the system, had spoiled it. But having said that, virtually at every meeting that we held, and it was 4 meetings a year, we would raise the topic of bringing the trust back. And it was the club's decision not to bring them back. It wasn't the fans' decision not to bring them back. We asked for them. Have you had any more thoughts? It was asked virtually at every meeting. Have you had any more thoughts? It was also asked outside the meeting. Have you had any more thoughts on bringing them back? And it wasn't until a couple of years down the line, if not longer, that eventually, from that prodding and poking that we were doing, that we finally managed to convince them that there should be a place, and a permanent place, on the forum for NUST. And eventually they were invited back. I think there were a number of meetings took place between their representatives and the club, where they kind of signed back up to the code of conduct. There was an acceptance of what had happened in the past that was wrong, what had gone wrong. There's probably an acceptance on both parts that there was an overreaction, but that's just conjecture from my part. But certainly they were allowed back in. But if you look at some of the things, and this is a gripe that I have, Steve. I saw this week on Twitter, people putting out new representatives of the board, for example, putting out, give me your questions, and these are the points. Tell me what points I should be bringing up with the club. And I saw some of the points that were being brought forward, and I thought, well, all you've got to do is look at the previous meetings of virtually every fans forum that's been held since 2012. And you'll see that those topics have been well covered. In fact, even if you looked at what we'll probably talk about later, which is the totally new setup that they have as far as fans liaisons concerned and communication, some of those topics were even covered as closely as December 2019. And yet we've got fans out there thinking that, they can rewrite history, or they can rewrite the script, or that they're doing something totally fresh and it's never been done. It's just crazy.
Steve, we'll come to you, and then we'll come to Mitch and Keith. Just briefly on your time with the fans forum. I mean, I
wasn't too much involved with it, actually. I think what years were you talking about? Because I didn't come in as initially elected, but there was a guy called Mark Bradley, if I remember rightly, was facilitating the meetings, who I knew. Is that right, Steve? Can you remember that name?
Mark Steve Bradley? Can you remember Bradley?
No, the name doesn't ring a bell, I must admit.
There was an outside guy, had nothing to do with the club at all, was kind of facilitating. That was the sort of thing he did.
Right.
And he got me to go, because I think I wasn't one of the ones that got chosen to go. I think I had applied, but it was a random selection originally to get people on. And he said this fans forum was going on and got me. I didn't go to very many, but it wasn't working, I don't think, from the couple I went to.
I think that was the version of the fans forum that we talked about crashing. The one before Steve was called back by Wendy Taylor, because that was a very almost hand-picked talking shop that talked about how sharp the chips were, and somebody's written a rude word in the toilets and things like that. It was certainly not a hard-hitting discussion forum. It was very much doing something to tick a box for the Premier League.
That's right.
Yeah.
And with regard to what Steve's talking about with that meeting with the trust, I mean, I was over here by then. Steve and I bounced the minutes the club eventually put out, along with the NUST self-published minutes. And the sad thing there was, had the trust been smart, had they just, instead of going off half-cocked, if they just sat on it, they ended up folding and holding a pair of kings. Because I remember going through those meetings with Steve and a back and forth in email, and I think there was about 5 different things that if the trust had been smart and just let the process happen, the trust could have then had the club's pants down about 4 or 5 times out of those first set of minutes, and made the club look really stupid, because some of the things that were covered in that meeting were potentially embarrassing for the club, and all I had to do was just wait. But because of the lack of trust, because everybody was so keen to land the first punch, and that's the relationship that's existed and still in part exists today, that they went off totally half-cocked in an effort to get the first blow in and say, right, got you. You've been you're messing around already. You haven't published the minutes like you promised. You've done this, you've done that, so I'm going to get you. When all I had to do was let the club keep digging, and once the club minutes came out, they'd already dug the hole, and all the trust had to do was just poke them in there with one finger. That would have been easy. It would have been easy, and that's such a crying shame. And then going forward, I think there's no recognition I've seen from anybody other than people who were close to Steve for the work he did to get the trust back on that fans forum. And the biggest supporter and the person who worked the hardest to get them back involved again was Steve. And he deserves a lot of credit for that, because after what had happened with the trust and Steve, he could have quite happily turned around and stuck 2 fingers up and said, sod you. But never did, because Steve sees the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is getting everybody at the table. And that means everybody you physically can. And getting them at the table in the right manner and in the right atmosphere. And build the bridges and build the trust, have a conversation. You do far better pissing from the inside of the tent out than trying to piss from the outside in. And it doesn't mean you're in bed with the club. It doesn't mean that you're a Quisling or a turncoat or a traitor, and many other words that have been chucked around at Steve, I must say. It just means that you're open to try and create a dialogue to smooth the ways of whoever the owner is, because there's no guarantee the next owners are going to get it right. And so there needs to be processes there to continue a dialogue.
Yep. The ironic thing is that as the fans forum moved on over the years, and it grew from strength to strength, because the people, there was a turnover. You would have somebody would be in for 2 years, and the half would drop out after a year, and then there would be fresh blood coming in, fresh emphasis on various aspects. There was always a demand. There was always an interest from fans to be part of it. But what it also did, it kind of, that refreshment that came, kind of stimulated the club as well. It shook them up at times, because of the people that were coming in, because the people were then part of the process, if you like. But what it also did, because of the questioning, because of the change in emphasis that took place, because it moved from being a confrontational to more of a dialogue, it gave those round the table more confidence to ask more probing questions or more interesting questions and move away from, you know, we've got a problem with a dead pigeon in the Gallagher end, or the floor's slippy at the back of the East Stand, or there's a hole in the roof. It moved from those type of things into more dynamic stuff, because there was certain ways that you could ask questions, because by then Lambias had gone, John Irvin had gone, Lee Charnley was there. Lee was quite open to any question. Sometimes he wouldn't give an answer, but that's fair enough. That's what the whole is about. And sometimes the lack of an answer is just as important as the fact that they come up with some gobbledygook. And we suddenly noticed that there was an interest being taken by the press, certainly the local press, because at the time, certain pressmen were being banned. They weren't getting access to the club. They weren't getting access to managers. They weren't getting access to speaking to people in the club in the manner that they previously did. So the interest in our questions, it suddenly turned into, I'm getting phone calls. When are the minutes coming out? When are the minutes coming? You know, phone calls from guys in the press. When are the minutes coming out? Guys on the radio. Any word? What day are they due? You know, you get a phone call. What's going to be asked at the fans forum this time round, etc. And then the press guys would suddenly get 4, 5, 6 days worth, because the minutes when the minutes come out of column inches, you know, talking about and starting the dialogue and getting, you know, this would create another set of questions that would then move on. Whether or not the club welcomed that or not is neither here nor there. It's not part of my remit to say, oh, we can't do that because the club don't like it. But it was the monster that got created, if you like. The lack of information coming out of the club on a daily and weekly basis, but then having this open forum to discuss almost anything or to ask almost anything, and to then have the press hanging on the word of Lee Charnley with his answers to those questions. It kind of also meant that those lads and lasses round the table became more dynamic with the questions that we're going to ask. And we also, I mean, there was a lot of good things came out of that fans forum. I mean, you wouldn't have the Strawberry Place closed pre and post match day if it wasn't for the work that was done by supporters in the fans forum, for example. That wouldn't have occurred. That would never have occurred. That was a security feature that came about after a number of incidents at various sporting events, Christmas do's, etc., in Europe, where vehicles had been used as weapons. And everybody around the table was very keen to get that closed, stop this from happening. Can we have the Strawberry Place closed? And the aggro that we went through, and that, you know, we went to meetings and, you know, as fans, as members of the fans forum, but as also as individuals, we went to the city council and we canvassed them to, you've got to close this road. And we were told we had to come up with a reasoning for it. So we did. We came up with a fully sensible, rational reason for why Strawberry Place should be closed on match days. The most important one being that there was a risk that somebody would drive a vehicle through there and use it as a weapon. Now, we also knew that there was something going on in the Home Office to do with what they call the last mile. And this was a policy, if you like, that was being developed on how security, they call it the last mile. It might not be a physical mile. It might be, you know, it might be 5 miles. It might be 250 yards, but it didn't really matter. But it was about how safe members of the public would go to a sport event. And we were able to do something before any other football club in Britain with regards to stopping traffic outside the ground so that fans could leave that ground safely and securely, and without the risk of somebody doing what subsequently has happened in London on a couple of occasions where vehicles have been used as weapons and continue to happen in Europe. So it's things like that where you work with a club and you get the full backing of the club to do it. You know, you get their full support. And when you then have to take it up with the city council and you've got the football club behind you, but you're doing it as supporters, you're doing it as a supporters group, or you're doing it as individual supporters with the collective force, if you like, of the football club behind you, you become a lot safer, a lot stronger, and you become a lot more dynamic. So let's just that as one example of how the fans work closely.
I think if you look at it, I mean, the narrative that some people, and one individual in particular, would have for what Steve has done with the club in terms of the fans forum is that he's up there every 5 minutes having a cup of tea and a Battenberg cake with Lee Charney and chatting about the weather. And it couldn't be further from the bloody truth.
No.
And it's work like that you see when you hear how much effort and time goes into that. For the benefit of everybody, at the football club, with the entire backing of the football club, that only comes through sensible dialogue.
Yeah,
it doesn't come through confrontational meetings and creating problems, because there's enough problems and there's enough mistrust without creating additional, which is unnecessary waste of energy. Even as somebody who was only really involved at a distance, gratefully brought into certain email conversations, not just by Steve, but by people inside the club. It frustrates me greatly, because you think, if this worked right, and if they could get this working right, it does return some power to the fan base, a lot more than people realise, and it only comes through sensible dialogue.
Yeah, I mean,
I think another. Can I just say? I think that one of the things that you achieved there, but it's taken a long time to do it. And probably, if you go back and a lot of the other things, it's not getting that quick win, the way you're seen as doing something that is visibly positive, and that even goes right back to what I talked about the NSA, the early days. Opening the Gallagher Club was a thing, but it was seen as negative because we got Vauxperian, and it wasn't. There's a. So you want a downer getting criticised all the time, and I think that seems to be a common pattern all the way around. Fans Liaison Committee was the same. We didn't get a quick win.
And I think that was the haste of NUST to produce their own minutes. Was they were desperate to get out those quick wins, and there was quick wins in there, a lot more than they realised.
Yeah.
And all that to do was wait probably 3 days.
Did you ever get paid, Steve? Did you ever get paid for it? Do you ever get paid for any of this?
No, Joe.
Never. So how many years do you think
you? Penny.
How many years do you think you're involved in it?
I think the first meeting around about 2011, 2012, and the last meeting that we went to were December 2019, where I went to 4 meetings in 4 days.
So 8 years.
Christmas week, because what happened was that it's quite ironic that there was one particular meeting where the meeting went on for 3.5 hours. This was probably May 2019. It went on for 3.5 hours, and I don't think we got past item 3 on the agenda. And that was because a couple of individuals took it upon themselves, or one in particular, took it upon themselves to continue hammering home certain aspects of the fans forum, the way the club was operating, etc., that weren't really part of the agenda, but became a logjam between 2 individuals. One being Lee Charnley, and the other one being this particular person. And after 3.5 hours, and everybody sitting around the table with this to and fro and going mainly between those 2, I think people are losing the will to live. And I think at that point, when the meeting ended, I heard that Lee Charney said that was it. There was going to be no more fans forum meetings that were going to be conducted like that, where it was somebody trying to put him on the spot for 3.5 hours in a searchlight, and he wasn't prepared to put up with it. And it wasn't good for him. It wasn't good for the rest of the people around the room. It wasn't good for the football club, and he wasn't going to have it anymore. And in future, we needed to find a different format. Now, I was dead against the new format that they put in, because when the new format was presented to us, it was presented in a way that the club, had put a bit of thought into, but basically the 4 topics that we were going to talk about in future were the top 4 topics that got covered in any other business, or may have, for example, ticketing may be a topic on its own because there was a specific problem that had occurred on a set of cup tickets that had never arrived, away tickets that were not going out in the right way, and fans were travelling to away games without a ticket, and they were having to pick them up at the away ground, and then they weren't getting in on time, or the away club didn't know what was going on, and all sorts of that messy things that would run of the mill stuff. But I felt as though the format wouldn't work, and I felt as though that it was being not watered down, it was being destroyed. But the rest of the vast majority of other people said, well, if this is all we're going to get, it's all we're going to get. We'll run with it. There was going to be 4 meetings or 4 topics that you could pick and choose, 4 subgroups that you could go to or not go to if you wanted. We finally managed to persuade. Well, it was agreed that there would be one review of the season at the end of every season where Lee would come and he would sit there and there would be kind of a post-mortem. We managed to then move that on and get at least a pre and post meeting, pre-season and a post-season review with him, where we could question what the club's plans were for the season, where they were going, what the coach's plans were, where we thought the club was heading, and then at the end of the season find out, well, why didn't it? Well, we all would have been, why didn't it work out the way it was? We were promised 9 months ago. So that was agreed. The topics, 4 subgroups you had: stadium and match day experience. So we're back to talking about the pies again. Ticketing. The issues with ticketing, probably very apt if we'd managed to have a fans forum recently or had a subgroup run after the problems that some fans have had with the new season tickets. Community and foundation, which was basically an update and an upgrade on being informed of what Kate Bradley used to tell us, and now it was going to be Steve Baharrell, which would give us an insight into the work of the foundation. Obviously, the foundation was growing. It was doing a lot of more mental health stuff, etc. There was the Be a Game Changer program. There was the health stuff that we're doing with the 12th Man. And there was the work that they were doing to get Murray House. So you were going to hear about all of those type of things. And the final one was a group called, which I thought was called Diversity. It wasn't until I looked at the club website earlier in the week I found it's now being referred to as United as One. So they were the 4 groups. I went to 3 of the 4 meetings in the Christmas. I then turned up at an event, a black and white event that was being put on by the Evening Chronicle. And I walked through the door at that event on I think it was the 18th of December. Certainly it was the night of the last time that any of these groups met. And some of the press guys, because it was to do with a food bank, they were doing a talk in, and I was there in Beelham House bar. And they all said, where have you been? And I said, I've been to fans forum meetings. Oh, great. When's the minutes out? I went, what minutes? I said, well, the minutes of fans forum. That's great. Hopefully it'll come out before Christmas and we can get some press. I go, you're not going to get any press. Why not? I go, because it doesn't work like that. Of course it does. That's what, and you've got like all the top press guys from the Chronicle and that, half a dozen of them, and Gibbo and people like that. They're all sitting there going, well, it does, well, that's what we'll write about. And going, no, you can write about problems with ticketing. You can write about the foundation. You can write about the dead pigeon being still in the leases or the Gallagher end, and you can write about United as One and some of the great work that's being done on diversity and on the rainbow colours and such like, and about the work that's been done at Druid Park with the women's team. And they went, well, when you're going to ask the questions of Charlie, when you're going to be pinning him to the floor, like had previously happened. And he went, it doesn't happen like that anymore. It's gone. And they all went, well, why? And my answer, condescending or not, was because you guys didn't fight for the fans forum. You guys listened to other people. You guys, you're in a different camp now, and you never really took it seriously. And it's gone. And it's never met since. It's never met since December 2019. I know we had COVID that came in the March, but I think we've had two. I've been on 2 Zoom meetings with the club to do with under the guise of ticketing, but it wasn't. It was more to do with how we would be able to get fans back into the ground. When the first lockdown was over, and there was a plan which never ever materialised because they still didn't let fans in, and then there was another meeting held again, and that wasn't anyone other than, I think there was two club representatives and maybe half a dozen or more fans, including representatives from NUST, Thomas Concannon, and I sat there, and Thomas and I liaised after the meeting, and we wrote a little plan and some ideas down that we wanted the club to consider. We had the first one. We'd had a presentation by Steve Story, the security officer, who had told us everything that the Premier League was saying would have to happen if fans were allowed in. But quite honestly, at the time, we knew fans were never going to be allowed in anyway. It was an awful lot of work being done for what we knew would be pointless, because we knew that the Premier League would never be, and the government would be never letting fans into the ground at that particular time of sort of May, June 2020. And sure enough, they didn't. And then we had the full season 2021, where again there was no fans in. So that's the only time that we've met. That's the only group that's been held. I'm not aware of any others. I presume all of the people who would represent the clubs on diversity, ticket and community and foundation and stadium and matchday experience were probably furloughed. I don't know. I'm just saying that facetiously. But the fact that there was none of those meetings took place, or that none of them have took place. So if anyone wants to see the minutes, just go on, click on the fans on nufc.co.uk, click on the menu and click fans, and then you'll see what was discussed. And I would advise anyone who's recently joined the NUST board to do exactly that, because some of the questions that are being raised by people now to them have already been covered, already been answered. And the topics are very, very, I would say, probably the most up-to-date that they'll ever be, until some point when these groups do eventually meet up. Whether Vera Lynn's holding them or not, I'm not too sure.
Can I ask you, Steve?
Last 15 minutes, Keith. I want to come to you, Keith. You haven't had too much chance to chip in because this hasn't really been your bag. I want to do the last 15 minutes purely on what's going on now. Feel free to ask Steve that question, but now I want to know, where do we go from here?
I just want to say, Steve, how many hours did he do for, what was average hours you did a month for that, just roughly, just a round number? Just a number.
You could be doing the meeting, before the meeting, your prep that you would do,
just roughly
the emails that you would put out, the stuff you would put on Fans United to ask for questions, the work you would do when you would talking afterwards, the intervening conversations you had at the club. You could be talking 3, 4, 5 hours or more a week.
Right. But if you did like 5 hours a week, it's 20 hours a month, and you've done it for like 8 years. It works out at it's like 2,000 hours you've done, and you're saying you're walking around with a target on your back. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder why. Just because I was listening to all this and trying to take it in, because I'm newer to this, but why would fanzines be against you after doing 2,000 hours of trying to communicate better with the club? That's the bit that I've picked up tonight.
Well, I think Steve answered that question right at the very start when he said that nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. Yeah. There is an element that if you want to do something good and it doesn't come from them, then you'll get kicked in the teeth.
It comes back and bitches herding cats. It's all the lessons your lad's telling me. It's all coming up. Going back to the future, Steve, Mr. Wraith, what's happening in the future? I mean, people ask me every day what's happening and why am I getting a little bit less confident things are happening. So at the minute, I think it's quite easy. I think in the future, I think it's a fragmented fan base, and I think that communications, whether they come from the club, which obviously they don't come through, or whether they come from various groups like podcasts, fanzines, they're so mixed. You know what I mean? And people are so labelled, it seems, with what their agendas are. And if you look just in the takeover, there's people who want it and people who don't. And if you say 97 to 99% want it, by God, the 1% or 3% at most make an awful lot of noise to push their agenda through of what they don't want to see. And I think what I've learned is there's a lot of people out there don't want I would say a lot of influential people within the fan base don't want a Saudi takeover. But going forward, right now, everybody knows on the 27th of September, the club will go to a jurisdiction on the CAT, and they will try and deny the Premier League from stopping the case running. The legal team feel they'll succeed with that, but then there's a risk at the moment that they'll run a case to try and to do an appeal. The fear is that could take as long as a year. They might not even get an appeal. The judge might just sit there and say that the points that's been proven, and I'm sure one of them points is going to come up, is going to be the fact that Newcastle United probably signed up to say that they would, when they became a member of the Premier League, would take any disputes to arbitration. And by taking a CAT case, they could suggest that's different. However, the people taking the CAT case aren't the club. It's St James Park Holding. So I think that will get thrown out. Going forward, if it does get delayed, I think it pushes all of our doubts. And I know you, Steve, have voiced yours quite clearly. The doubts that PIF will be around, that PCB will be around. And then that's our fear. But fans, fans seem to have accepted more from you, Steve, that you've said, look, I think it's over. But they're questioning me why I think it's slipping and why I think it's less likely to go through. So what I'm saying to people is it won't happen unless something changes. It won't happen. We'll never get the certainty or the control that we had at one stage where the takeover had a chance of going through and the club were in a strong position, because when the case was ready to run and people felt that the arbitration was going to happen in July, that would have brought us answers. The next thing they thought that the CAT case was going to run sooner. Bear in mind, I was lobbying for the CAT case in October last year. It took till April this year to do it. You were in a car, Steve, with me, and you heard the QC on a telephone call say to me that, he just dead openly was asked, if we'd run the CAT case when Keith did it in October, would you have won? He said yes. He says, would you have had new owners? You've had new owners at the club now. So for me, I fear and feel a loss of appetite and a loss of communication. And I think Steve Hayes will say that one of our fears has been that the club and the buyers aren't as close together on this now. It just doesn't. We don't feel that, and we feel as though the club might be doing something separate themselves. I mean, there might be another buyer in town. We don't know. But whatever's happened that's caused the club to release a joint statement from the Premier League, almost agreeing that the arbitration will be done not on a date in January or May next year, just as early 22, has sent warning bells to everybody. So what do I think is going to happen? I think that what will be. Let's see what happens in September the 27th, whether that CAT case runs. I'm always confident if the CAT case starts to run, that the case will crumble, because the disclosure the CAT will give them, which will be, if he says the case is running in December and it happens in September, you'll get the disclosure halfway through.
Okay. So I mean, obviously we know you've given us a little insight in the takeover, which I felt was important. What I'm trying to get at, because this is about the fans.
Yeah.
This is going out this week. We've recorded this over the last 6 or 7 weeks. Where does this leave the fans? Because I think the fans are clearly disunited. That's the whole point of doing this series, to explain to people why fans are disunited. You've got the pledge by the trust. They're off doing one thing, trying to buy 1% of the club. You went out on Loaded Football the other night and talked about potentially getting fans together to potentially put some money in to fight a separate legal case. Some fans are for it. The usual suspects and others are jumping on it here, and this is ridiculous. You had people trying to do War Fund. You've got another account, Transparency Protest, going out on their limbs doing stuff. We're getting more and more different fans groups starting. We're more disunited than we've ever been, Keith.
Yeah, I agree with you. And
So,
I think
how is this going to end? I don't think it'll ever will. I don't think I'll ever see a United fan base in my time. Even if I completely walk away from the fan base, because bear in mind, people point the finger and say, "You're the problem. You're the problem. You're the problem." I can walk away from this, and I guarantee you, I'll not be the problem anymore.
No,
but somebody else will be, and this fan base will never be united, and that's pitiful.
And to endorse what you're saying, you do get the blame, you know, Steve Wraith and you know, Steve Wraith allowed his account to be used to, when Q-Tech and Holly arranged the coaches to go to London at zero margin, he was accused that he was taking 30 quid off fans, and he never got a penny. So what I've realised, and more so listening to Steve Hasty as well tonight, if he's done 2,000 hours free of charge and walks around with his target on his back. You know, last night, Loaded Mag broke all its records. It's gone to 2,300 views, never been there. Said it had more listeners than ever before. And everybody was positive. And what I wasn't doing, I wasn't saying to people, do this. It's when you try and do something different for the fan base, it's the snipers that they're to get you. So they've got a target on Steve Hasty's back for trying to communicate. They've got a target on Steve Wraith's back for trying to let people use his accounts at zero margin. And what it is, it just seems as though the fan base, and I think you're right, Steve. I don't think it'll ever improve. I think we might have had a lull if there'd been a Saudi takeover, because I think everyone would have got focused on football again. But I think whenever you've got disgruntled pitch performances, lack of investment, I think then the fans fight amongst themselves. And I think the bodies, the voices in there that's out there, it's the people who cause a lot of it, who ask for people to settle down. And what I've done is I've just gone on my own. I'm just one bloke on my own, spending my own money. And I've had criticism, being shot to bits. So going forward, what will fans do? I don't know. I was confident if PCP had took over, they would have really, really put the whole fans' communications and liaison to bed. And I think they'd have done it effectively and aggressively and really made that a priority. I've watched what Mitch has done over the years. I've listened to Steve Wilkinson tonight and think how many years you've been involved. But when I listen to you, Steve, you can hear disillusionment. You can hear you saying that, you're nodding, and I appreciate that. You're saying that we're giving up and people weren't listening to us and we were making a difference, but it wasn't happening. But Steve Hasty, I mean, he must be scared to death. And for me, I think there's more emphasis in this fan base on what you can't do than what people can do. And I think that a lot of you talk about usual suspects, Dave, but this is Steve Hasty comfort night. There's been 8 years of targeting free of charge work, and I've spent I've spent a big sum. I've spent a 8-figure sum trying to get this club to be better, get a case in the court. I've been slaughtered for it.
Last couple of minutes, lads. Listen, because we've pre-recorded this. We've had a long night. We've done the retro show, which ran over time as well. I'm conscious that we're all doing this for free. We all want to shoot off and do bits and bobs with the family. Mitch, final thing on Newcastle United. Can the fan base ever pull together?
The drive has to come from whoever a new owner is.
Yeah.
They've got the opportunity. They have the opportunity to set an agenda, a positive agenda. To give you more hours, Keith, that certainly Steve and I have done, we've been involved directly in 4 potential bids for the club, and done all sorts behind the scenes on that. I could share with you a PDF of a potential development of the Riverside State cricket ground in Chesterley Street that come out the back of that we then got involved with as well. And more besides, all unpaid, never had a penny, never taken a penny, never asked for a penny. One of the things we did get involved with was trying to get the Binzai group back involved. And the plans that we looked at from them were 50-50. Half the ideas were totally bonkers, and half the ideas were absolute genius. And it was neither one nor the other. But they'd obviously looked at what Man City's owners did when they came in. 100 days of meetings. 100 days of meetings. They had everything from Fanzine, tasting the pies and picking the pies. They're talking about, what do you think the new badge should be like? What do you think our away strip should be like? With some things which might seem so trivial, but yet they're important to certain elements of the fan base. And that's what they'd looked at doing. And that was one of the better ideas in their package, was to create meetings where you could get people along. But the engagement has to come from the club.
From the top.
And under the current owner, who is basically the captain of a ghost ship now, for all there's some great people involved at our club still, and we can't say this enough, Steve and I, that they are hamstrung constantly because there is no desire at the very top to interact and communicate anymore, because there's no trust and there's no love there. And I think the only way that we're going to get back together properly as a fan base starts at the very top of the club with the ownership, and then perhaps we can start to heal together. And then it's up to people like us who have a platform and a voice, and we're not afraid to use that voice to generate some of that healing, and not use the platform to have the go at other people and other people on other platforms and turn it into a war and use it for certain personal agendas, or twist the narrative a certain way. That's got to stop. But again, that won't stop, in my opinion, until there's change at the club and the attitude of the club, top to bottom.
Steve Hasty?
I agree absolutely wholeheartedly with that. I'd also say that if I look back to, say, 2018, I remember saying to someone that if new owners came in, they would have a 3-year sort of peace dividend before
to me, Steve.
Before things would start to slip. The way things have been lately, I worry that even if new owners come in, that 3-year dividend that they could gain might not be there, because I feel as though there are so many people within the fan base, within social media, the way that it's exploded during lockdown, the number of blogs that are out there, the number of people with their own agendas, the number of people with agendas against other people, not necessarily just the agendas that are positive, but negative agendas. I feel as though there's a negativity around the fan base that they would almost certainly use to turn against anybody, whether they were new owners or not. And so that worries me. That's a concern I have. What, on the positive side, I would say is that we've always said that the most important thing with a football club was the communication aspect. And if new owners did come in, it would be the first thing that we would be writing to them and telling them about, and telling them what's gone wrong, what they need to be doing to put it right, and hopefully that there would be an ear there that was listening, that was intelligent enough to understand exactly what the point is. Because let's face it, people like the 5 of us in this little quorum tonight, and the people that we actually interact with are the sensible people who would be able to give them an absolutely brilliant ear to understand exactly what they can do with this football club. And we would give them all the help we could to make sure that it was a success.
Steve Wilkinson, final word.
Well, really, I'm just thinking, going back over the 60 years I've been going, 60 years coming up in next year, there's really only been a very short time when we've really related to the top, and that was when John Hall was first in the early 90s, and Keegan was in as manager. But even that started to go wrong when they started making it a PLC, because they changed the communication, because they weren't going to be the owners anymore, and that's what sort of changed things. And you had even then the resisted fans communication, because Freddie Fletcher always used to say, I think there was attempts to get some sort of forum going then. He says, if we need to canvass opinion, we've got 36,000 people on the waiting list. we can just send an email out to everybody, or it wasn't there then, or a letter, and just get feedback from them. But it is from the top that we haven't got a chance while Ashley's there, unless he has a very unexpected U-turn, which nobody's expecting. And I was always, I've been hopefully behind everything that has been going on in trying to get PCP and the consortium. My wish would be the PCP and the Rubens would find another financer other than PIF, if that was ever possible, because I think we definitely relate to Amanda Staveley. We definitely relate to the Rubens. They've already done a lot of development in the city, and I think having the right sort of finances, and we don't need the zillions of the PIF we're going to put in. We need somewhere in between what Ashley's prepared to put in, which is zero, and PIF who had lots. And that's, I think, how the way ahead. And I would hope that, Keith's talking about the club might be talking about somebody else. My hope is that if it is going to fall flat, that they realise it isn't going to happen because of the barrier that's there between the EPL and the club in terms of PIF being involved, and that there is some way forward with another consortium.
Yeah, listen, been fascinating this, lads. Fascinating series, and I hope that the general public and the fans of NUFC Matters will watch this, will listen to it, and the full series that's been on this week, and they take from it what they want. It wasn't set up to have a slanging match. It was setting up to give clarity about all the fans groups, all the fans politics, all the fans organisations, and our involvement in it. And just try to give you a fuller understanding of our involvement and why we have got, as Steve Hastie's rightly pointed out, targets on our back. And this has gone on long before Twitter, Facebook, and all of the social media. This has gone on for many, many years now. And we're still here. We're still fighting for the cause. We're still supporting Newcastle United. And we're still doing our bit free of charge. Except that time I took the Fans Liaison. That was a job, of course. But that aside, we've done all of this for free because we love the club and we want to see it do well. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Listen, great to have you on, Steve Wilkinson, Keith Patterson, Steve Hastie, Mitch. Thanks for doing this. Take care, lads. Good night.
Cheers.
Good night.
Take care.
Cheers, everyone.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again.